Welcome to Shaping Your Success, brought to you by the Law Society of Scotland and Hay Legal. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Jim McCormick. Jim is the Chief Executive Officer of the Robertson Trust. And for those of you who don't know, the Robertson Trust is Scotland's largest independent grant-giving trust. It provides funding to organisations that are committed to tackling poverty and trauma in Scotland. Now, Jim will be known to many of you as one of the leading experts of poverty in Scotland. He's worked for many years in that sector, both looking to identify causes of poverty and trauma and, of course, their solutions. So I wanted to kick off, Jim, by asking you why you first became involved in this area of work.
Thanks, Johanna, and thanks for the invitation to join you today. I guess for about 25 years now in different guises in Glasgow and Edinburgh and London, I've been working on public policy or research or funding to try and find long-term ways to prevent and solve poverty in Scotland and the UK. And I think that independent funders have a particular place in this landscape and a responsibility that goes beyond the funds we can invest, which compared to governments are of course really small, but if we use our funding wisely as a catalyst and we keep an eye on the long term as well as attending to here and now pressures, of which there are many we may discuss here, we can create some multiplier effects if we get this right and persuade decision makers in all sectors that poverty is not just costly, damaging and real, but is also fundamentally solvable.
And Jim, just to focus in on the work of the Robertson Trust, I think over the next 10 years, the Trust will be expecting to share a significant amount of money, around £200 million, over that decade with organisations that are looking to alleviate poverty and trauma in Scotland. So what do you hope to see achieved with that level of funding going out to tackle what we know is a growing issue?
Already this year, we're at the start of our 3-year budget plan, we've managed to, with our board's approval, increase and bring forward a larger average amount of grant giving than was originally planned a couple of years ago. So there's an acceleration and a degree of urgency about our funding. At the same time, we're also really aware that we could spend every pound of that budget allocation with charities really only keeping the lights on or keeping heads above water. And in the context of a cost of living crisis coming hard on the heels, overlapping with COVID in many ways, yeah, it would be very easy only to do mitigation, however high quality that mitigation is. And so we've also earmarked about a quarter of our resources to protect, if you like, for what we describe as big change that lasts, identifying proactively with our partners and with people who have direct experience of poverty and trauma, better ways to design support, services, solutions, keeping the door open on responses that today we haven't even thought of, but within a year or two will become clearly a good response to the risks we now see. And you know, I think that although this problem is complex, some of the solutions need not be. Ultimately, we all need to have financial security. We all need to have affordable housing. We all need to have networks and relationships we can count on, especially in tough times, and education and work opportunities that give us prospects for a better future than we have today. Now, I don't simplify what has to be done, but often the problem in this country has been not consolidating around the evidence, not sticking with what we know to be effective, And because we've got the whole of this decade to stick with this strategy, we have a fighting chance of contributing as much as an independent funder can to building, like I said, big change that lasts.
And just focusing in, Jim, on those acute challenges that you've described, COVID-19, the devastating impacts that's had in so many different ways, and really a continuation of that crisis into the inflationary pressures, fuel, food, poverty that people are living in. And you mentioned there some of the solutions not having to be overly complex, sticking with what's effective. Do you see any of those solutions? Are they the same solutions that you've identified over the course of your career, or is there something specific and tailored given this sort of unique continuation of the crisis that we will be facing in this country and across the world as we move forward?
I think what has to be different, and this was true in the past, but it's unavoidable now, is whatever we're going to focus on, whether that's government or what businesses do or what funders do, what really matters is how we go about it. It is the shift in power and voice and participation that has to take place, rather than us believing we have, our expertise alone is sufficient. It's when we blend our professional expertise, which has been learned through the years, with first-hand expertise, which sometimes professionals have got that, but often you have to connect directly with people to understand what's happening and to design responses that go with the grain of life today. And it's when you get that blend right, you're much more likely to be creating responses that will be successful. So for me, it's the how-to question has to go alongside the what question and the why question in tandem, not as an afterthought. And there are examples in education or in the way in which often small amounts of money wrapped around what seems to be intractable problems can start to be shifted if we get our design principles and values in the right place from the outset.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Jim. I just wanted to highlight some of the figures maybe for people that are listening to us about, and these numbers are flagged continually by the Robertson Trust around, so over 3-year period 2017 to 20, 1 million people living in relative poverty after housing costs in Scotland, and 240,000 children in those circumstances of poverty and trauma. And in the law, we've seen quite a focus on as lawyers having a trauma-informed approach. So and that's not just confined to criminal justice and family law. It might go wider than that. So if you're dealing with someone who's come through some form of abuse, that might be in the workplace or in an education setting, for example. So just thinking about where we are today in Scotland and some of the tools that we're trying to use to better understand trauma and poverty, I just wonder if you'd explain to us your understanding, your experience of that interaction, Jim, between trauma and poverty.
I mean, the getting to where those spheres overlap is really part of the work we do, and we see through our grant making, and we have open responsive funding where we make monthly decisions without an opening and closing date. It's like a rolling program of support we offer. We see more and more strongly aligned grant applications from all kinds of partners across the country. And what's common to them, I think, is an understanding that it is, developmental trauma rooted in relationships that have failed, commonly linked to the care system and all the things adjacent to that in terms of housing risks and risks in terms of offending and low educational attainment. Those kind of sustained experiences trying to spot the risks, trying to intervene in ways that empower rather than do unto people, but also where there has been historical trauma, where people are no longer children, and we're talking about secondary or tertiary intervention, we must stay the course. We must not say that we give up on those adults and those families and only focusing on prevention within childhood, because we know enough now around multiple and complex need and trauma to know that you can create support patterns that can change the direction of people's lives. Getting there is difficult, and we've got tons of evidence still in our systems of failing to act upon those insights. We see it in the revolving door we've got in our prisons. We see it in, although it's changing, we hope, within the care system. And we see it within all sorts of people who experience what we call the hard edges of homelessness or addiction or violence or offending. The failures we continue to create in our systems, where we ask people with multiple complex needs to go through multiple complex services one by one, rather than more typically offering embedded one-stop support, which is holistic, which will stick with people as long as it's needed, which is empowering. We do know a lot about what's going to make the difference, but we struggle, sometimes for understandable reasons, not always, to create the kind of support people are desperately searching for. And I think we've got a responsibility to demonstrate why acting in line with the Christie principles, which are now 11, 12 years old, of prevention, participation, so on, why acting in line with those principles is good at a human level, will save a lot of time, money, and heartache, and why continuing with what we still often do is high cost, risky, and poorly evidenced. A long way of saying, I think that we need to stay true to what we learned around these better ways of working and supporting people, and not be blown off course by the pandemic or by other risks that we now face.
And you mentioned, Jim, I just wonder if you could give us an example or examples from your experience where you've seen that sort of holistic, integrated partnership approach working. One
really tangible example would be from one of our partners in Change, and this is one of our 6 projects in a portfolio that's focused upon long-term change. And we're working with Capital City Partnership in Edinburgh on a programme called Maximise, and it is offering income maximisation support, debt reduction support, but also, when people are ready, parental and relationship support and employability and training. And so some of the things, not everything, but some of the things that will help people stabilise their finances, avoid cliff edges of being sanctioned or being evicted or getting into unmanageable debt. And what's so powerful about this approach is you access this support at the point of need when you present. So that might be when you go to your GP surgery or the nursery of the school or the housing department. And it's not that we're asking GPs or head teachers to become stand-in welfare rights officers. They're not trained, they don't have the time. But it is saying we can embed those people who do have those skills in those settings confidentially, anonymously, so no one knows about the additional support you're receiving when you go there. And crucially, it's using the point of presenting with that need to help people quickly and then across multiple fronts, rather than sticking with a really inefficient model of signposting people or doing appointment referral. So signposting and referral might work for you and I, but for people who are barely keeping their heads above water, if they said to me, go and see Johanna next Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning. She's expecting you. The chances are I'll never turn up at your door. I don't know you. I've told my story a dozen times already. I'm exhausted. I just need to put food on the table for my children. I'm skipping meals myself. I'm not paying my energy bills this winter because I have to put my rent ahead of everything else. That's the reality of people's lives. It's about to get tougher. And the least we can do is make our systems easier to navigate rather than putting the responsibility upon people who are time stretched and cash poor.
Yes, that's really interesting. I've seen that, Jim, in context of it might be in early years or a nursery setting. So an area where people feel comfortable and at ease, and then offering, it might be income maximization or something around literacy. And I suppose there's the point about where do people feel that trust can be built?
Exactly. I mean, ultimately, I've heard, it's said that trauma is created in relationships that have gone bad or have damaged people, but it's healed, it's resolved within relationships that work. And the same is true for all kinds of lower tariff support that people need. It's all very well, saying there's a helpline or a website. If you're not confident or for whatever reason you don't access those support, there is an irreducible place for trusted, confidential, face-to-face support. And it's just about finding the best places to embed that.
Jim, I started with a why. Why were you drawn into this area of work? So I wanted to end with a question around how you've developed as a leader in your area, how that's evolved over time, and whether the skills and that you feel that maybe you thought you needed at the start of your career and what you think you need now. I wonder if you could just share with us any thoughts around that.
I suppose that looking in the rearview mirror, probably I put too much naive faith or expectation in the idea that if you learn enough stuff, in terms of knowledge, and you try and apply it through tried and tested channels like public policy and government programs and so on, that's enough to make social change happen. I think what we've all learned is progress is never a job that's just done. You have to kind of remake that all the time, and therefore it's the importance of other qualities. It's being clear in your direction, but being flexible on the means you use in the here and now. It's being unwilling to compromise on values, but being willing to compromise and find yourself in common ground with unlikely allies. It's delegating, trusting, and developing people, and it's being open to challenging your own assumptions when there is new evidence, when there's fresh evidence. It's having enough pragmatism to be able to change your mind. And finally, I think the job of any leader, especially in the here and now, is to keep practical hope alive. And you have to have examples every day of your working life as to what that means, rather than it just being a kind of starry-eyed vision. I think you have to be able to work with people and build reasons to remain optimistic in our everyday practice.
And on that hope-filled, optimistic note, I think that's really important that we do end, given the challenges that we're all faced with, communities are faced with. Really pleased to end on that optimistic note. Jim McCormick of the Robertson Trust, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you very much for being with us.
Pleasure to join you, Johanna. Thank you.